On the afternoon of January 11, 1992, in Madison, Indiana, two brothers, Don and Ralph Foley, headed out to the woods to go hunting. While walking through the woods, they would make a gruesome discovery.
I thought it was a mannequin to start with, or one of them rubber dolls you hear about.
But upon further examination, they would learn that it was the burnt body of a young girl. The brothers immediately contacted the police.
She was burnt real bad from here up.
A medical examination revealed that the victim was 12-year-old Shanda Sharer. She was reported missing by her parents. The young girl had been through unimaginable torture prior to being set on fire. What would wind up unfolding in this case would shock the town of Madison and the nation. Here are the events that led up to this horrific crime. In the summer of 1991, Shanda moved from Kentucky to New Albany, Indiana, with her mother Jackie, who had just recently divorced from Shanda's father, Steve. There, Shanda enrolled at Hazelwood Middle School. This was the first time Shanda ever went to a public school. She had only been attending Catholic schools up until that point, and she was very excited about going to a school that didn't require students to wear a uniform. Like many kids entering a new school, Shanda was worried if anyone at Hazelwood would like her and if she would fit in. Shanda was a very outgoing person and made a lot of friends in Kentucky. But since she was in a new town where she didn't know too many people, she worried if she was going to connect with anybody. Jackie would later report that Shanda was nervous the night before she was to start at Hazelwood and constantly questioned her if anybody would accept her there. Jackie recalled trying to put Shanda at ease, saying that she was a likable person and believed that she would quickly make friends. Once Shanda started at her new school, her fears were put aside. Jackie's prediction was correct. She did instantly make friends at her new school. Jackie recalled Shanda coming home, ecstatic about the students she met at Hazelwood and how many of them accepted her as their friend. For the next few days, things seemed to go well for Shanda until one day she got into an argument with another student in the hallway. The altercation drew attention from many students in the hallway, including 14-year-old Amanda Heron. It was her cousin that Shanda was arguing with, so she intervened in the altercation. The altercation got heated enough to where Amanda knocked Shanda to the ground and began assaulting her, causing a big scene in the hallway. A teacher eventually split the two up and escorted both of them to the principal's office, where both girls were given in-school suspension for a week for the fight. Shanda had never gotten in trouble in school before, so this news completely terrified her, and she had no idea how she was going to tell her mother that she gotten into a fight in school. Once Shanda came home and Jackie saw her with a black eye, she was forced to tell her about what happened. This was when Jackie first started having concerns about Shanda being in Hazelwood. Meanwhile, Amanda expressed her hatred towards Shanda to many of her friends and bragged about how bad she beat her up. But once she and Shanda began serving their in-school suspension together, her feelings about Shanda quickly changed. The two started to get along and quickly formed a friendship. It was there that Shanda learned that Amanda was a lesbian and was attracted to other girls. It wouldn't be long until Amanda had her eyes set on Shanda, and by the time the two finished serving their in-school suspension, Amanda developed an attraction for her. Amanda began to leave Shanda love letters in her locker. Word began to travel in Hazelwood about Amanda's feelings towards Shanda. There would be one student who was greatly upset about hearing this news. Amanda's girlfriend, 16-year-old Melinda Lovelace. Melinda was a girl with a troubled past. She suffered years of sexual abuse from her father and was neglected by her mother, causing her to have anger issues. Melinda's father eventually left the family, and even though he molested Melinda on several occasions, Melinda still had a strong bond with him and was devastated when her father left. It is believed that one of the reasons why Melinda was attached to Amanda was because she resembled her father and was determined to latch onto anyone and anything that reminded her of him. Amanda found Melinda to be possessive and controlling and was often physically abusive towards her when she looked at other girls. So at first, she hid her relationship with Shanda from Melinda. It didn't take long for Jackie to become aware of the friendship between Shanda and Amanda, the girl who had beaten her up, and at first she was against the idea, but Shanda was able to convince her to change her mind, expressing to her what a good friend Amanda was. Melinda became more and more furious the more Shanda and Amanda hung out. She believed Shanda was taking Amanda away from her, and she was willing to do whatever it took to keep Amanda as her girlfriend. Melinda began sending notes to Shanda in her locker, demanding that she stay away from Amanda. At first, Shanda ignored Melinda's demands and continued seeing Amanda, making Melinda even more angry. At one point, when Melinda spotted Shanda in the hallway, she grabbed her by the hair and slammed her into a locker and threatened to beat her up if she didn't stop seeing Amanda. Completely terrified at seeing the fury in Melinda's eyes, Shanda promised Melinda that she'll stay away from Amanda, which put Melinda at ease. Melinda's relief would be short-lived though. One day while she was snooping through Amanda's locker, she found a note that read "Shanda loves Amanda." Once Melinda came across Shanda again, she immediately confronted her over the note. Shanda denied writing the note, but Melinda didn't believe her and once again, she threatened to hurt Shanda if she didn't stay away from Amanda. Shanda continued to ignore Melinda's warning, and Melinda later spotted Shanda with Amanda at a school dance. From there, Melinda flew into a jealous rage. Not only was she angry at Shanda, but also Amanda, as she felt that Amanda had betrayed her. Amanda had feelings for both Melinda and Shanda, and despite the hostility brewing between the two, she maintained her relationship with both girls, writing both girls love letters. Many students who knew Amanda believed that she actually loved seeing Melinda jealous over her every time she hung out with Shanda. But soon, Shanda's feelings for Amanda began to wane, and she began dating a few boys at Hazelwood, which put Amanda into a jealous rage. Similar to how Melinda was feeling when Amanda was hanging out with Shanda. Through letters, Amanda let Shanda know how she felt about her seeing boys, forbidding her to have any contact with boys. She had become possessive of Shanda. Shanda's mother Jackie was getting concerned about her daughter's relationship with Amanda. Since she started hanging out with Amanda, Shanda's behavior drastically changed. She was failing her classes, she was skipping classes, was wearing loose clothing, and was getting in trouble. While cleaning out her room, Jackie found a letter that Amanda wrote to Shanda, instructing her to forge her mother's signature on a detention slip. Jackie would bring all this to Shanda's attention, and Shanda immediately felt remorseful for her behavior. Shanda told Jackie about Melinda threatening her and only hung around Amanda for protection from her. Jackie told Shanda to stay away from Amanda, believing that Amanda was becoming a bad influence on her. Shanda obeyed her mother's wishes and began keeping a distance from Amanda. Amanda was still in love with Shanda, so when Shanda began avoiding her, she became even more obsessive of Shanda. She frequently called Shanda's house and often followed her home from school. Jackie became aware of this and personally told Amanda herself to stay away from her daughter, even going to Amanda's house, and made her parents promise her to keep Amanda away from Shanda. Eventually, Shanda would break her promise to her mother and began talking to Amanda again. It wouldn't take long for Jackie to discover that her daughter disobeyed her when she found a love letter that she had wrote to Amanda. Upon learning that Shanda was still having contact with Amanda, Jackie decided to remove Shanda from Hazelwood and enrolled her into a Catholic school. Shanda was devastated about her mother taking her out of Hazelwood, but Melinda was ecstatic over the news. With Shanda now out of the way, she felt she could have Amanda all to herself. Melinda's happiness wouldn't last, however. Even though Shanda was now out of sight, she was not out of Amanda's mind. Amanda was still having contact with Shanda, and it wouldn't take long for Melinda to discover this. Melinda was furious over the fact that Amanda still had feelings for Shanda and felt there was nothing she could do to make Amanda forget about her. Her hatred for Shanda intensified. Many people believed that the reason why Amanda kept in contact with Shanda was because she was Amanda's leverage to keep Melinda interested. The more Melinda thought Amanda was interested in Shanda, the more interesting Amanda became to Melinda. Not only was Amanda keeping Melinda more interested in her, she was also making Melinda hate Shanda more and more. Melinda believed that Shanda was ruining her life. Melinda wanted Shanda to die and began thinking of ways to kill her.
Melinda begins writing letters to Amanda. Frightening letters wishing Shanda dead.
Well, obviously I didn't think she was capable of murder. I thought maybe she'd just, try to scare her.
She ultimately came up with a plan to drive to Shanda's house in the middle of the night, lure her out, and annihilate her from there. Melinda convinced one of her friends, 17-year-old Lori Taka, to assist her in carrying out the attack on Shanda. Despite not knowing who Shanda was, Lori was down for Melinda's plan. Lori was described as being a sadistic girl who is obsessed with violence, so Melinda thought she would be a perfect person to help her with killing Shanda. On the night of January 10, 1992, Melinda and Lori made the drive in Lori's car from New Albany to Jeffersonville. Melinda learned that Shanda was spending the weekend at her father's house, so the duo headed there. Lori brought two of her friends, 15-year-olds Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence, along for the ride. Hope and Tony were unaware of Melinda's plan to kill Shanda, and neither of the two girls have met Shanda. Once the girls arrived at Shanda's father's house, Melinda instructed Tony and Hope to go to the front door and introduce themselves as friends of Amanda once Shanda answered the door. They were then instructed to tell Shanda that Amanda was waiting for her at the witch's castle and that they were going to take Shanda to see her. The witch's castle was a burned-down mansion in Utica, Indiana. It is believed by many locals that witches had once inhabited the place, but the townspeople had burned it to the ground, causing the place to be forever haunted. Once the girls arrived at Shanda's father's house, and Hope and Tony got Shanda to come out, they told her that Amanda was waiting for her. But Shanda said that she couldn't go because both her father and her stepmother were awake. She then told Hope and Tony to come back in a few hours and she'll sneak out to see Amanda at the witch's castle.
And Shanda answered the door. And apparently Steve and Sharon, his wife, were sitting there in the living room. And he heard one of the girls say, "Shanda home?" And of course Shanda answered the door. So he knew immediately these girls didn't know Shanda. He couldn't hear what was being said altogether, but he heard a little bit. And from what I understand, when she closed the door, he questioned her about it, a little bit angry at her because he didn't feel she was being honest with him.
Melinda was furious upon learning that Hope and Tony were unable to get Shanda to come in the car with them, but calmed down when both girls told her that Shanda had instructed them to come back later, and then she was going to sneak out. So all four girls drove away, and in the meantime, they all attended a concert in nearby Louisville, Kentucky. Once the concert was over, the four girls drove back to Jeffersonville in another attempt to get Shanda. This time, it was Hope and Lori that went out of the car to retrieve Shanda. Melinda, meanwhile, covered herself in a blanket and hid in the back seat, holding a large butcher knife, preparing to scare Shanda with it once she got in the car.
There were not mean-looking, dirty child molesters. There were two children that looked like her that were not threatening, and they said, "Just walk 25 feet and talk to her." And that's what she did.
Once the girls drove off, Lori asked Shanda if she was still having contact with Amanda. When Shanda admitted that she was still seeing Amanda, Melinda quickly rose from the back seat.
You stole my girlfriend!
Melinda demanded Shanda to tell her if she and Amanda had been intimate with each other. Shanda admitted that they had been, which further infuriated Melinda. Shanda cried and begged the girls to let her out of the car, but her pleas fell on deaf ears, and the girls just continued to drive to the witch's castle. Tony, feeling sympathy for Shanda, asked Melinda not to hurt Shanda and to let her go, but Melinda refused and told Tony that if she did, then Shanda would tell on them, and then the girls would wind up in trouble. Once the girls arrived at the witch's castle, they pulled Shanda, who was crying hysterically, out of the car and forced her into the ruins. With Hope and Tony standing by and watching, Melinda and Laurie tied Shanda up in the main room of the ruins as she continued to cry for mercy. Melinda and Laurie began stripping Shanda of all the jewelry she had on, including her Mickey Mouse watch. Laurie then retrieved a t-shirt from the car, doused it in whiskey, and lit it on fire right in front of Shanda, and told her that she was going to end up like the t-shirt by the end of the night, further terrifying her. But then the girls quickly panicked, afraid that someone driving by was going to see the smoke and flames and then see what they were up to. So they quickly put out the fire, grabbed Shanda, headed back into the car, and drove off. The girls stopped at a gas station to get gas, where Tony stepped out of the car to make a phone call at a nearby payphone. Tony was completely horrified seeing what Melinda and Laurie were doing to Shanda, but instead of calling the police and getting help for Shanda, Tony called a friend to help calm her down, only trying to make it out of the scary situation herself. Once Tony got back in the car and the girls left the gas station, they decided to head over to Laurie's neck of the woods. Laurie lived in a very rural area and Melinda saw it as a perfect place to kill Shanda. On the way to Laurie's, Shanda continued to cry and begged the girls to let her go. Hope and Tony ignored her, while Melinda and Laurie just mocked her and made fun of her crying. The girls stopped by a wooded area, just a quarter-mile from Laurie's house. Hope and Tony remained in the car, while Melinda and Laurie got out and then pulled out a completely terrified Shanda. Before Melinda and Laurie walked away with Shanda, Tony once again pleaded with Melinda to let Shanda go. But Melinda refused to do so and told Tony that Shanda will get them in trouble if she let her go. In the freezing cold, Melinda forced Shanda to take off all of her clothes while Laurie tied up Shanda. Melinda took Shanda's clothes and threw them in the car, telling Hope and Tony that she was going to keep them as souvenirs. Once Shanda was tied up, Melinda and Laurie began throwing punches at Shanda.
Her hands and her feet are tied. She had had braces put on just several weeks before this. And Melinda gets in front of her and Shanda's on her knees. And Melinda takes her knee and just crams it up in her face several times. So she's bleeding profusely from the face and the mouth. They stab her in her feet, the bottom of her feet, and in her legs. One point, Laurie and Melinda take a rope, it's on her neck, and each of them pull it until she is no longer conscious.
In a possible attempt to impress Melinda, Hope got out of the car and held Shanda down while Melinda and Laurie continued their assault on her. Toni Lawrence is the only girl out of the four that refused to participate in torturing Shanda. Once Hope got back in the car, Toni reprimanded her for helping Melinda and Laurie. Believing that she was now dead, Melinda and Laurie grabbed Shanda and threw her in the trunk of the car, and then with Hope and Toni, they drove off to Laurie's house. Once the girls got to Laurie's house, they all went inside and left Shanda in the trunk. Once Melinda and Laurie washed Shanda's blood off them, the four girls headed to Laurie's bedroom to hang out. Shortly thereafter, the girls heard the sound of a dog barking, and then they heard Shanda screaming from the trunk of the car, shocking Laurie and Melinda, as they thought that they killed her. Laurie left her bedroom, grabbed a knife from the kitchen, and headed outside to the car.
Shut up.
Laurie repeatedly stabbed Shanda until she stopped screaming. Laurie then headed back into the house and walked back into her bedroom with the other girls, with her clothes once again stained with Shanda's blood. Once Laurie returned, she and Melinda decided to drive around town, but Hope and Toni were tired and opted to stay behind, so Laurie and Melinda headed into the car by themselves and drove off while Hope and Toni remained in Laurie's bedroom. As Melinda and Laurie were driving around, they were thinking of ways to dispose of Shanda's body. They discussed throwing Shanda off of a bridge, burning her body, and burying it. During the discussion, Melinda began having doubts about Shanda being dead. She told Lori, who was driving the car, to pull over, and she and Lori got out of the car and walked towards the trunk to see if Shanda was dead. Much to the shock of both Melinda and Lori, when they opened the trunk, Shanda sat up, her body covered in blood, the whites of her eyes were exposed, her hair and skin were dark red, and she was crying for her mother. Despite being beaten, strangled, and stabbed multiple times, Shanda was still alive. Melinda and Lori were now getting frustrated. They couldn't believe that Shanda was still alive and wondered what was it going to take to finally kill the young girl. The two desperately thought of ways to put Shanda out of her misery. As the two girls were driving around, they continued to hear Shanda make noise in the trunk. She wasn't screaming anymore. Instead, she was faintly kicking at the lid of the trunk. Once again, the girls stopped the car. Lori got out holding the tire iron and headed to the trunk. She opened the trunk and once again hit Shanda over the head with the tire iron, knocking her unconscious. Lori headed back in the car, holding the tire iron, now soaked in Shanda's blood. Melinda noticed that Lori had a crazy smile on her face as she bragged about how she felt Shanda's head cave in when she hit her with the tire iron. Then Lori shoved the blood-covered tire iron under Melinda's nose and asked her to smell Shanda's blood. Melinda refused, but Lori kept asking her to smell Shanda's blood on the tire iron. Eventually, Melinda got annoyed and grabbed the tire iron away from Lori and threw it in the back seat. Lori then bragged about how bloody Shanda looked and how she was covered from head to toe with blood. Melinda and Lori drove around town for hours with a severely injured Shanda in the trunk of the car. Every time Shanda made a noise, the girls stopped the car, grabbed the tire iron, opened the trunk, and assaulted Shanda until she was quiet. Meanwhile, Tony and Hope were alone in Lori's bedroom. With Lori and Melinda not being around for a long period of time, and with Lori's parents in the house, Tony and Hope had another opportunity to get help for Shanda. In the period of time that Melinda and Lori were away, the girls could have also called the police and told them what was happening with Shanda. Instead of doing that, however, Hope and Tony just crawled onto Lori's bed and went to sleep until Melinda and Lori returned just before dawn. When they returned, Melinda and Lori were covered in Shanda's blood. Both of them bragged to Hope and Tony how they tortured Shanda and how they kept hitting Shanda with a tire iron every time she made a noise. Melinda and Lori were talking so loud that they woke up Lori's mother, who ran into Lori's room and reprimanded her for having people over so early in the morning. Lori's mother then told her that she needed to take the girls home immediately. Lori obeyed her mother's demands, and all four girls headed outside and towards the car. Once they got to the car, with a cheerful smile on her face, Lori asked Hope and Tony if they wanted to see Shanda in the trunk. Tony declined, while Hope told Lori that she wanted to see Shanda. Melinda and Lori led Hope to the back of the car and opened the trunk to show her Shanda's mutilated body. Shanda was barely clinging to life, and there wasn't an inch of her body that wasn't covered in blood. Hope grabbed a bottle of window cleaner that was in the trunk and sprayed the fluid on Shanda. She then laughed at Shanda and said, "You're not looking so hot now, are you?" After a short discussion on what to do with Shanda, Melinda and Lori ultimately decided to burn her body, so all four girls hopped into the car and drove to a nearby gas station. There, the girls purchased a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. They poured out the Pepsi on the side of the road, and from the gas pumps, they filled the bottle with gasoline. Then the girls drove towards a nearby wooded area. Once there, Melinda, Lori, and Hope got out of the car and headed to the trunk to get Shanda. Tony remained in the car, wanting no involvement in the torture of the young girl. The three girls wrapped Shanda in a blanket, carried her out of the trunk, and placed her on the ground.
Lori opened the trunk and Shanda was in there, and Lori kept yelling at us to help her, and Tony was like, "I'm not getting back out of the car." And I said I didn't want to help her. I was like, I'm not going to help you. And Laurie yelled at me to get the 2-liter out. So I grabbed the 2-liter and I went to hand it to her. And she was like, no, just pour it on her. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. She said, just do it. Just pour it on her. So I did. I was the first person that poured the gasoline on Shanda. And I don't know who lit the fire. It was either Laurie or Melinda. And then they came and got in a car. And we drove away.
Shanda's body was engulfed in flames, but once the girls started driving away, Melinda looked back and noticed the flames surrounding Shanda was starting to die down. She told Laurie, who was driving the car, to drive back to the area where Shanda was burning. Melinda grabbed the Pepsi bottle and dumped the rest of the gasoline on Shanda, and the flames picked right back up. Once Melinda got back in the car, she bragged about how she saw Shanda's tongue slipping in and out of her mouth and expressed relief that Shanda can never come between her and Amanda ever again. Shanda's body would later be discovered by Don and Ralph Foley. The girls then went to McDonald's to celebrate Shanda being dead and joked that the sausages they were eating looked like Shanda's burned body. After that, Melinda and Laurie dropped Hope and Tony off at their respective homes, and then the two girls headed over back to Laurie's house. Once there, the girls began destroying everything they had of Shanda. Melinda burned Shanda's clothes and Laurie washed Shanda's blood off the trunk of the car. While doing so, Laurie found a fragment of Shanda's skull. She laughed hysterically and tried to get Melinda to smell it. Melinda and Laurie definitely didn't keep quiet about killing Shanda. Later on in the day, they told many of their friends what they had done to her. Those who talked to the two girls that day mentioned Laurie being really ecstatic that she helped kill Shanda. She couldn't stop talking about it and demanded anyone that she hung out with that day to smell Shanda's blood on the tire iron that she beat her with. Melinda even admitted what she had done to Shanda to Amanda. Melinda invited her over and showed her Shanda's bloodstains on the trunk of Laurie's car.
She told me everything that had happened. I thought it was a joke, because I just can't fathom that 4 girls would do this to another human being. This is stuff you wouldn't even do to an animal,
Back at the home of Shanda's father, Steve was horrified when he discovered that his daughter was not in her bedroom and couldn't find her anywhere in the house. He called several of Shanda's friends, asking if they had seen her, but none of them had seen her. Steve then called Jackie, asking if Shanda was there. When Steve told Jackie that Shanda was missing, Jackie rushed over to Steve's house, and the two headed to the police station and filed a missing persons report. Tony Lawrence, the least involved with Shanda's murder, was completely horrified by the events of the previous night. Those who saw Tony that day said she looked very sick and was crying uncontrollably. Tony even had to leave her job at Arby's early because of her trauma. That night, Tony told her parents what Melinda and Laurie had done to Shanda, and they immediately took her to the police station, where Tony confessed everything to the police, turning herself, Hope, Laurie, and Melinda in. By the next day, all 4 girls were arrested and charged for the murder of Shanda Sharer. Through Tony's confession and through dental records, the police were able to identify the burnt body the Foley brothers found as Shanda Sharer. Soon after that, the authorities informed Shanda's parents of the gruesome discovery and that their daughter was never coming home. In her autopsy, Shanda had 3rd and 4th degree burns on her head and torso. There were rope marks on her forearms and ankles, and on the base of her neck, she had 3 lacerations on her scalp. Black soot was found in her throat, indicating that she was alive when she was set on fire, and her official cause of death was smoke inhalation. Despite the severity of her injuries, the medical examiner reported that if the girls had not set Shanda on fire, Shanda would have survived. Shanda's autopsy also revealed that she had been sexually assaulted with a cylinder-shaped object. It's believed that one of the girls had taken the tire iron in Laurie's car and shoved it into Shanda's rectum. Shanda was laid to rest in Big Spring, Kentucky, next to her grandmother. Due to its gruesome nature and the young age of the perpetrators, the murder of Shanda Sharer garnered national media attention, dominating several national news stations. Shanda's classmates at her new school were shocked and horrified upon learning of her brutal murder. 5 counselors were brought into the school to console many of the students. A few days later, a memorial service was held for Shanda. As for the girls responsible for Shanda's death, all 4 of them were tried as adults. To avoid the death penalty, they all accepted plea bargains. In exchange for her cooperation, Tony Lawrence was allowed to plead guilty to 1 count of criminal confinement and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years in prison. Shortly after Tony began serving her sentence, she suffered severe mental breakdowns and tried to commit suicide by overdosing on antidepressants. She was in a coma for a week and was sent to a mental hospital for psychiatric care. She would be discharged 2 months later. In the spring of 1993, Hope Rippey went into trial for her role in Shanda's murder. During Hope's trial, her defense attorney stated that Hope only participated in Shanda's murder due to having fear of Melinda and Lori coming after her as well. During Hope's trial, Shanda's father Steve gave an impact statement, letting Hope know how much Shanda's death had affected him and the rest of the Sharer family. She was only 12 years old, and she was a daddy's girl, and all the special things we do together are gone forever, Steve said to Hope. May you rot in hell, along with your other murdering friends. Hope originally entered a not guilty plea, but she soon changed her plea and admitted to committing felony murder, arson, and criminal confinement. Hope was sentenced to 60 years in prison, with 10 years suspended due to mitigating circumstances.
There's nothing that I could ever do to take back what I did or didn't do, because I think that that's major too. There's nothing that I can ever do to repay Shanda's family or the community or anybody else. You have to give back. So I think that forgiveness is a process.
In the fall of 1992, Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett, the 2 girls who were the most responsible for Shanda's death, went into trial. They were charged with felony murder, arson, battery with a deadly weapon, criminal confinement, intimidation, child molestation, and criminal deviant conduct. It was there that the friendship between Melinda and Lori dissolved. The 2 girls blamed each other for Shanda's death. In court, Lori claimed that she was unaware of Melinda's plan to kill Shanda and denied ever hurting Shanda, stating that Melinda was the only one that caused Shanda harm. Lori would also claim that she tried to comfort Shanda and tried to stop Melinda from attacking her. When asked why she didn't get help for Shanda, Lori claimed that she was afraid that Melinda would kill her as well, and she didn't want to get in trouble.
Lori Tackett, a teenager who admits she tortured and murdered a 12-year-old, now says she was scared to go get help during the night the child was suffering. But Lori Tackett's brother says his sister has lied about that night and other aspects of her life.
She's lying about everything as far as I'm concerned. I think they're all lying. I don't just think my own sister's lying. I think they're all lying. All 4 of the girls should get years.
Melinda, on the other hand, did admit to hurting Shanda, but claimed that she only punched her a few times and then decided to take her home. But then Lori went crazy and began viciously assaulting her. Many of Melinda and Lori's classmates from school appeared in court and took the stand. All of them had firm beliefs that both Melinda and Lori were responsible for Shanda's death. Many of them recounted how Melinda expressed deep hatred for Shanda and her strong desire to kill her, and for a long time Lori had expressed interest in killing someone. It was also reported that, while Melinda was in jail, awaiting her trial, she bragged to other inmates about how much fun she had when she was torturing Shanda. Because of her involvement in a high-profile murder, she gave out autographs to other inmates, and in her jail cell, she hung a picture of herself with the words "Most Wanted" written on it. She also managed to get a copy of her school's yearbook. When she came across Shanda's picture in the book, she wrote, "So young, so pretty, had to die early." It appeared that Melinda actually enjoyed the fame she received for murdering Shanda. Many of Shanda's family members also took the stand and gave impact statements expressing the pain they felt from losing Shanda. Shanda's older sister Paige seriously reprimanded Melinda and Lori for taking Shanda's life, while Shanda's father Steve broke down in tears as he expressed how much Shanda's murder had shattered his heart and how upset he gets when he's on his way to work and sees school buses driving around and little children getting on them, instantly reminding him of his murdered young daughter. When Shanda's mother Jackie took the stand, she told the court that Shanda was a compassionate person and told the judge that the proper punishment for Melinda and Lori would be to place them in a cell with pictures of Shanda's burnt and mutilated body taped to the walls. She finished her statement by saying, "I know the law only allows 60 years for this crime, but to give anything less would be an atrocity equal to my daughter's death. Anyone capable of a horrendous crime should not be allowed on our streets." Melinda Loveless and Lori Tackett were sentenced to 60 years in federal prison. They would be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. Shortly after being sentenced, both Melinda and Lori entertained offers to sell their story of killing Shanda to television and movie producers. The Sharer family filed a civil suit against both girls along with Tony and Hope to prevent them from profiting off of the death of Shanda.
Shanda's death shatters her family.
She weighed 77 pounds.
In 91. The year before, that was the year before she died.
Shanda's father Steve was definitely hit hard by the murder of his young daughter.
Steve could not have been a prouder father. Shanda was his life. From the day that she died, he did everything he could to kill himself besides putting a gun to his head. And finally, he drank himself to death and he died at 53.
All 4 girls responsible for Shanda's death are now out of prison. Toni Lawrence was released in December 2000, only serving 8 years of her sentence. She remained on parole until 2002. Toni still lives in Indiana. She's now married and has 2 children. Since her release, she has gone on to say that she wished she could have stopped the murder of Shanda, but was too afraid of going against Melinda and Lori and feared that they would kill her as well. It was reported that every year on the anniversary of Shanda's death, Toni would post R.I.P. Shanda on her social media accounts. Hope Rippey was released in April 2006 after serving only 14 years of her 50-year sentence. She remained on supervised parole until 2011. While in prison, Hope obtained her GED and gotten a bachelor's degree. Hope's release from prison infuriated Shanda's mother Jackie.
I'm really angry about this. This is wrong. This is a battle I've been fighting for years. She was the one that poured the gasoline on Shanda. They had earlier stabbed her in her feet and her legs, and Hope took Windex and sprayed it in her open wounds.
She could have saved her life.
They all could have saved her life many times that night. There were so many opportunities. These girls murdered my child. And I don't have any say on whether or not we agree to a modification hearing. It's wrong. I'm very disappointed. I'm disappointed in the whole system.
In 2011, nearly 20 years after the murder of Shanda, Dr. Phil covered the case in a 2-part episode which featured Shanda's mother Jackie and her sister Paige. Hope Rippey also made an appearance on the show, where Jackie and Paige confronted her over her participation in killing Shanda.
I've not apologized to you in court or at any other time because I just haven't felt that.
Do you think I'm sorry is going to change anything?
No, okay. I don't.
Hope, let me ask you a question. How do you think you could have made this up to us? What could you have done to make this up to us and to Shanda?
I don't think that there's anything that I could do to make this up to you.
But there was. There was one thing you could have done. You could have stayed in prison, and you could have served out your sentence. That's what you could have done. There was only one thing you could have done, because you can't bring her back. You can't make that night go away. Try over and over and over and over and over, because it was always about you and what you wanted, not about what you should have done. So don't ever say you're sorry, because you're not sorry. Do you have children, Hope?
God, I hope you never do.
What I don't get is this picture right here.
I know.
This is a mugshot where you have been arrested after the death of an innocent child. And you're smiling ear to ear.
When I was arrested and I was taken in to be fingerprinted and have my mugshot taken, the two detectives that were with me were joking about my age and referring to the fact that they had kids my age, and I mean they were just trying, because I was upset and I was crying, and they were trying to...
What were you upset and crying about?
Because of what had happened and what was going on.
Were you crying when she was burning and begging for her mommy?
Actually, I was.
You were?
Yeah, actually I was.
So how did you keep pouring the gasoline on her when she... And you were crying while you were pouring gasoline?
No, I was crying when we left.
You weren't sad, because if you were sad, you wouldn't have done it. And you would have told somebody. You're not sad today. You just have to deal with it, because you already did it. You will always be a murderer.
What happened in your life, Hope, that made you capable of this kind of a crime?
I don't know that anything happened in my life that made me... I mean, I don't have an excuse like that. I didn't have, a horrible childhood where I was abused, and, I just was a weak kid. I just was...
I don't call somebody that murders a 12-year-old little girl and pours gasoline on her and sets her on fire weak. I'm sorry, but that's the furthest thing that I think. You can't do anything to make me better. You can't do anything to make her better. You can't bring Shanda back, and I'll never understand. I don't know how I am sitting here looking at a person who is considered a human being that breathes and speaks and laughs and smiles, that is capable of that kind of crime.
I mean, I understand that you don't forgive me and that you may never, and I understand that, but truly, truly, with everything in me, I am sorry. I truly am, and I'm sorry that even saying that sounds... I'm sorry. I just don't know what else to say.
How would your parents feel if it was you 6 feet under?
I don't know. I don't know.
You don't know. So don't tell us you're sorry.
Amanda Hebron also appeared on the show. She was another person Jackie blamed for the death of Shanda.
I blame Amanda Hebron. I didn't do nothing to her that she didn't want me to do.
Did you know that Melinda had made a death threat against her?
Mm-hmm.
She told you she was going to kill her, right?
Yes, and I went to the youth prosecutor and told them about it.
What'd you tell?
I gave them the letters that Melinda had wrote me, and I guess they said they was going to have a meeting with the parents, but I never heard anything about it after that.
And she confessed to you after the fact, correct?
Yes.
Did she show you the bloody trunk?
Yes.
And you didn't tell anybody?
No, because I just didn't believe it.
So you knew she was dead? When you heard those details, did you believe it?
I mean, part of me did, but a part of me didn't.
Did you ever think that you should warn Shanda's parents that she had made a death threat against her?
My dad warned them about the letters. The youth prosecutor warned them about the letters and everything that was going on.
They feel like this started with her relationship with you, and that you could have said something. When they told you, they confessed to you that they killed her.
Yeah, I did confess to people that they were going to kill her. Mm-hmm. So maybe the authorities could have done more stuff. And maybe her dad could have done something, when those 3 girls knocked on the door and Shanda answered the door, and he was like, "Who is that?" That's what I was told. He didn't even know that. She didn't even know who those girls were.
You're not blaming the father.
I'm not blaming the father. I'm not blaming anybody but the girls that did it.
Well, but it sounds like you're kind of putting something on the father.
Well, I mean, they're putting it all on me.
You're completely at peace with your role in this thing. You don't feel guilty about any aspect of this whatsoever. You have no regrets?
I mean, I do, in a part, feel guilty as far as not telling somebody when I found out about it. Nobody was calling my house looking for Shanda.
You said Shanda's mother's made your life miserable?
Well, mine and a lot of my family.
You seem pretty smug about this, and I would have thought that you would have had a lot more compassion.
I have had compassion, but I never got to say goodbye to her, I didn't get to go to her funeral. I was threatened not to go to her funeral.
Amanda Hebron was just as guilty and just as culpable as all the other 4 girls that went to prison. Amanda should have been right there with them. She knew Melinda Loveless had threatened to kill her. She knew Melinda was going to kill her. She did nothing to stop it. Even after she was shown the bloody trunk, she did nothing. Absolutely nothing.
In 2019, Amanda Heron was arrested and charged for domestic violence and criminal confinement. As of 2022, her case is still pending. As for Hope Rippey, it's been reported that she still lives in Indiana and now goes by her middle name, Anna. She reportedly became a lesbian and is married to a lesbian woman. Lori Tackett was released from prison in 2018, on the 26th anniversary of Shanda's murder. Since her release, Lori kept a low profile and remained out of the public eye. In 2008, she gave an interview expressing remorse about killing Shanda.
I didn't know Shanda at all. I didn't go into that evening knowing anything was going to happen, wanting anything to happen, expecting. I didn't. Peer pressure. That's all it was.
However, most people believed that Lori was not being sincere in her interview and was only making excuses for her role in Shanda's murder. On September 5, 2019, Melinda Loveless was granted her release from prison. While in prison, she spent her time training service dogs for disabled people. In 2012, she was considered to be one of the most competent and trusted trainers in the Indiana Canine Assistant Program.
But the hands that once took life now nurture it.
Oh, no, come over here.
Hi. Melinda Loveless has a leash in each hand and a new lease on life as a trainer of service dogs for the disabled.
She's happy to see me. Huh?
In 7 years, Melinda has become one of the most trusted and competent trainers.
And talking about dog language, let them figure it out.
In the ICANN program.
So we bring our challenges many times to Melinda because she's able to figure out what their strength is.
Now you're going to the shoulder.
Melinda has groomed Odell.
Shoulder, you can just watch your little hand.
As a courtroom dog for abused and traumatized children.
Odell comes in. And he's going to sit with them, and they're going to hug him, and they're going to talk to him to make it easier for them.
Jackie never wanted contact with any of her daughter's killers.
You know, all I've ever said is I just want to serve their sentence. That's all I've ever said.
I know what happened. Yeah.
But a breeder who supplies dogs to the ICANN program at the prison forged an unexpected connection.
I liked it because it wasn't planned.
I needed to talk to you.
Charlie Patrizzo, a burn victim like Shanda, convinced Jackie to watch a videotape of the new Melinda.
I was really taken back.
I could never, ever imagine having my own child and something happening.
I saw someone who was almost reborn.
So Jackie Vaught did something remarkable. She took up Charlie, the breeder, on his idea to donate a puppy in Shanda's honor and let Melinda Loveless train her.
When you found out, she said yes.
Yeah.
What?
You know what? I didn't believe it.
Not until the puppy, Angel, ran into her arms the first time they met in a crowd of people.
Good girl. What have you been doing? That's the one Jackie had touched, had held, had named, and I said, wow.
Jackie has faced criticism over her decision to let Shanda's killer honor her name.
Good job.
But if you don't let good things come from bad things, then nothing ever gets better.
But despite Melinda's good deeds in prison, her release, along with the release of Lori, Hope, and Tony, sparked outrage among many people in the country.
Yesterday, the last of 4 teenagers convicted of killing a 12-year-old southern Indiana girl in 1992 was released from prison.
But as WDRB's Fallon Blick explains, a classmate calls it a major slap in the face to the victim and her family, even after 26 years. Fallon.
Lindsay, David, that classmate says when Shanda Sharer was killed, she got a life sentence. And he says the justice system should be ashamed to let all of her killers walk free again.
More than 2 decades have passed, but Craig Schoonover still remembers the warm eyes and big smile of Shanda Sharer.
Very happy, always in a good mood.
He also remembers being in class with Melinda Loveless, who pleaded guilty to torturing, beating, and burning Sharer's body in a rural area of Jefferson County, Indiana.
her and I sat face to face with each other from August of 1991 till January of 92 when this happened.
Loveless was released from prison on Thursday, and if Schoonover came face to face with her now,
I probably wouldn't be able to hold my tongue. I mean, I would at least give her a nice verbal thrashing.
Loveless is the last of 4 people to be released from prison. She convinced 3 other teens, Hope Rippey, Lori Tackett, and Tony Lawrence, to participate in the crime because she believed Sharer stole her girlfriend.
It was like just one of the most surreal feelings ever.
Schoonover runs a Justice for Shanda Facebook page. He believes all 4 should have spent the rest of their lives in prison.
Indiana justice system should be really ashamed of themselves, honestly. It's just unfortunate that she ran into some legitimate monsters that are walking among us. And now, the last one is free. It's crazy.
As of 2020, Melinda is reportedly attempting to change her name to Lindy Doris Monroe, possibly an attempt to hide from society and for those wanting revenge against her for what she did to Shanda. Jackie would go on to say in many interviews that every morning when she wakes up, she tells herself that she's one day closer to seeing Shanda again.